this topic is one that I apply to a lot of different areas of life, and we decided to kind of translate it into this setting to say, well, how can we apply it in a few different areas of our velocity development series? And so week one this week is going to be on really kind of our personal or individual life. So we're going to walk through a few examples. You'll see what those look like. But then it's exciting because next week, or next month, excuse me, our next session, we're going to be talking about leadership, and we're going to pick apart a few examples. And then the following month, we're going to talk about your organizational culture. And so where some of these things can come into play there as well. And so I want this to be really interactive. Like Brooke said, we're going to have a handout or an activity that we'll be doing in each one of these that you'll see pop up in the chat box here in just a little bit. And we'll work through that together. But this shouldn't just be an hour or now 54 minutes of me talking, right? So I'll prompt some discussion. I'll share some context about what we're discussing, but I want this to be really interactive so that you can learn from each other, so that you can share. I'm sure that that exposure will be valuable as well. And then, like I said, each month we'll have a different set of topics that we discuss. So all extremes lead to error, right? People die from droughts and floods. We often say as part of our disc training, our birds training, that the overuse of a strength is what creates weakness, right? That there's a lot of things that are strengths, but if we carry that that virtue to the extreme of becoming a vice, right, that's where we get into trouble. And so often, whether it be an inspirational quote, whether it be something you hear from a conference, whether it be some article you read, some book you're reading, some post you see on Facebook or Instagram, there's these things that sound really warm and fuzzy or sound really inspiring in the moment. But when you stop to unpack, or when you start to really think about how do I apply that or how do I implement that into my life, you might think, well, that sounds really good, but is it actually what I need to be doing? Because depending on who you are and depending on what your goals are, may depend on whether that's exactly what you needed to hear, or it might be the exact opposite of what you need to hear. And so, especially when we compare two things side by side, because there's a lot of areas, and some of you may have picked up on this before just from kind of reading things, but there's a lot of things that are in fact mutually exclusive. There's a difference between theory and practice. There's things that may sound really nice in the moment. When you actually look at how do they affect your day-to-day, there may be things that are in fact mutually exclusive, competing theories, concepts that are on opposite ends of the spectrum, where you're faced with almost a dichotomy where you have to choose, well, in reality, if I can't do both of these in the same moment, what actually do I need to be focused on? I'll give you a quick little example. And I just pulled it up because I'm like, this will be something that's kind of a good way for us to kind of put ourselves in context here. I just quickly did a Google search for like, you see all these articles for, the qualities of a leader or the things that make for a great company, right? And so I'm just going to literally share this one specific article. And I love when things are this bold too. 26 qualities that lead you to greatness, right? 26 ways that you can become a leader who people actually follow, right? As if this is the secret potion. This is the one size fits all cookie cutter silver bullet that's going to take you to leadership greatness. And so let's just go through. They're just attributes, right? They just list some things. Being authentic, it's great. Being brave, that's great. Character driven, decisive, engaging. All fantastic attributes, not in any way, diminishing the work of this author of this article. But let's just take a couple of these. Being decisive, for example. We would all acknowledge that being decisive is a good thing, right? I think especially in modern times, especially in 2021, especially in a coming or now over a year into a pandemic year, where people struggle with anxiety, with decision fatigue, with of course having too many options to choose from. Decisiveness can be a very good thing, but when you overuse decisiveness, it can become careless, right? It can become haphazard. It can be actually dangerous to yourself or to the organization. You can make bad decisions. You can hurt people because you're not thinking through the implications, right? Fearless, there's another one. Being fearless is a good thing, right? What happens if you overuse the concept of fearlessness, right? Well, that can be dangerous, right? There's a fear. Our brains are hardwired to have our amygdala fire when we feel unsafe, right? To protect us. So being fearless can be a good thing, But is it always a good thing? There are some people who are already pretty good on the fearless side. What they may need to be is a little more pragmatic. There's some people who already may be really good on the decisive side. What they may need to be is a little more analytical, right? Or maybe drive for consensus a little more. Humility is another one. It's actually one that we're going to talk about in a future session too. Being a humble leader is a very valuable trait. People need to recognize that you're human, that you're not trying to elevate yourself to a pedestal, that you're willing to put the needs of others before yourself. But isn't leadership also about being brave and courageous, right? And showing that confidence. And so these are just some quick examples where if you just look through this list, a lot of these things are great traits, they're great attributes, but they may or not be the things that are actually going to help you move the needle on your leadership, to use this as an example. So, Lauren or Brooke, if one of you can go ahead and throw that questionnaire or the activity into the chat box. What we want to look at is a few examples of where these things may actually contradict. I'm going to share what those examples are, but we're going to do a step before we get into that. I just want you to be kind of thinking through the process. So personally, I love to apply this to quotes, right? I'm a big quotes guy. I love quotes. I keep them all over my desk, bathroom mirror, on my computer on sticky notes. I bring them up in a lot of different sessions because I have appreciation for words, right? And when people say things that help you kind of see things differently, and it helps it just to click and resonate. But when we start to think about a couple of these, there are a few that are in fact mutually exclusive. I'll give you one of my favorites. It's going to be the one that we start with. But again, we're going to do another step before we get into that. The first one, anyone know the definition of insanity? Can someone come off mute and share that with us?
Doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results.
Exactly. The definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result, right? We've all heard that. It's out there all the time, right? Well, we've probably also heard, if at first you don't succeed, try, and try again, right? Anybody ever heard that quote? Yeah. Please tell me how you're supposed to do both of those, right? Does that mean try again? Like there's only 3 or 4 and then you move on, right? It's not a one size fits all approach. On one end of the spectrum, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again, right? Stick to it. Don't give up. Persevere, be resilient, follow through, execute and fully get it across the finish line. On the other hand, the definition of sanity, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So get out of that routine. Stop being so stubborn. Move on, right? Give up. It's okay. Go try something else. There's tons of opportunity out there, right? Break the pattern, break the cycle or the habit. So you feel how those are two very competing theories, very competing concepts. Both may be good advice. They likely are. It just depends on your default tendency and what you're trying to achieve. And so I want us to kind of think about this on the progression of a spectrum. That's how we're going to walk through some of these things. So if you even see the activity form, you'll see that further down. And again, we'll get into that in just a minute. But if you see that further down on page 2, we're going to think about this as part of a spectrum. Meaning if on one end of the spectrum is one extreme, and on the other end is the other extreme, the odds are you already fall somewhere in between. But where you are today and where you need to be in order to achieve your goals might be moving the needle one way or the other. And we're going to unpack some ways to have some kind of do some introspection, some ways to reflect on that, some self-awareness around where you might fall as well. But before we do that, I mentioned 2 things, and they're really important. And that's because this filter that you apply, this finding the fine line, that filter you apply should be based on your goals. And so I'd love for you to take just a minute here as we get started and answer those first 2 questions on page 1. It is a fillable PDF. You can type right into the chat box and answer those 2 questions. First, what do you want to achieve this year? And try to think about something tangible, something observable, measurable, right? What are you hoping to achieve? Maybe for you, it's the growth of the company or the goals of your department. Maybe for you, it's a promotion or an opportunity that you're trying to capitalize on. Maybe it's a new customer acquisition or building out a new business line, right? What's something you want to achieve this year? You can even apply it to your personal life. Maybe it's something you're preparing for, something you're working towards. Maybe it's a fitness goal. or a family goal, right? And then the second question is, how do you want to be seen by those around you? So not just like how do you want to feel, but I want you to think about from the perspective of others and how they observe and view your behavior. How do you want to be seen by others? So take just a minute and answer those two questions. As we're talking about a lot of these topics, I tend to think of them like filters, right? We're using these things as filters to determine what we should and shouldn't do. We know that our values or our beliefs are what guide our decision making. But a lot of times we can let these external influences or inspirations affect that as well. And so these filters are really helpful for us to define, for us to be, take ownership of really what are we focused on? How are we using this to help move forward? And a lot of times, an analogy that's helpful for these things is like a GPS, right? You're trying to bridge the gap. You're trying to get from point A to point B. And where are you today? What are your default tendencies is really key to understand. But then secondly is where are you trying to go? What are you trying to achieve? And so we're going to talk about both of those because this is one of those things. This isn't just a grade school comment. This is one of those exercises where there is no wrong answer, right? Because it is unique to you. It's exactly what you're trying to achieve. So is anyone willing to share something that maybe they listed for that first one around what are you trying to achieve this year? What are some of your goals? I know it's a little vulnerable. I got people from a lot of different organizations represented here, but anyone have something they're willing to share? It can be as vague or as specific as you'd like it to be.
I can share. Um, so one of the things that I put, it would be a little bit different, I think, in Canada than in the States, but in Canada, it's called our CPHR designation. And so I do have a degree in HR, and it's mostly just, it's what a lot of organizations want to see to show your commitment to the profession. And so I've been kind of dragging my feet. I did the first step of it, and I've been waiting to do the knowledge part for about 5 years now. So my goal, it was to do it last year, and then with COVID, that kind of got pushed. So my goal this year is to actually get the designation. So that's what I put.
Awesome. So for you, you have a specific goal in mind, and it's about working towards that and actually getting it across the finish line. That's great, Carlene. Thank you. Anybody else?
So I'll jump in. I'm working on improving my presentation and communication skills this year. And the pandemic's really driven me doing a lot more of that kind of work. So I thought it was a great time to work on it.
Yeah, that's awesome, Rick. And good to see you, by the way. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, good to see you.
I'll share. And I hope that one of my teammates is here listening. So one of the big things so personally, I have some things I'm working on, which are around more like, like being more balanced and creating more space between stimulus and response, so that I have more time to process, because I generally have a better result when I give things a little bit more thought and emotion. But professionally, our company is at a stage where we're growing really rapidly, and we have some work to do on our leadership team for creating like collaboration, but I don't mean it in like a woo-woo kind of way. I mean like actually working together. I mean something very tangible and specific, creating safety for each other, and giving each other the benefit of the doubt. There's a lot of work that we started doing with Velocity right before the pandemic, and it kind of got pushed to the side. So I'd like to see us do that, and I'd like to see us really work on those relationships so that we can work in better alignment and work through the growth that we're doing more effectively and kinder with each other.
Yeah, that's awesome, Aubrey. Glad you and Betsy could join us. Thank you. What about the second question? How do you want to be, perceived by others? How would you like someone else to describe you, or how do you want to be seen by those around you? Anyone have an answer for that one?
I can share on that one. I want to be seen as trusted. I want people to know that they can come to me unless they're going to kill somebody, that kind of stuff, right? But trusted. I want to be seen as a strong leader, moving forward and pursuing the things that are important to me and the company.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love that. Thank you. Anybody else?
How about me? Inspirational, supportive, can do, make it happen, and persevering.
I love that. I love that.
I don't want a short list. Got to.
So
Yeah.
I'm not as competitive as Bob. My list is shorter, but it's two things. One is to be perceived as authentic as well as caring and giving. Then on the business side is a thought leader.
Love that, Mark. That's great. Anybody else? All right, so this process alone of crafting the future state, right? That ideal future state of where you want to be, either the things you want to achieve or kind of how you want to be known along the way of getting there, requires us to start with a level of self-awareness already, right? Any of our trainings, any of our content, any of our coaching programs that involve emotional intelligence, kind of development, it always starts with self-awareness, right? We even say it as part of our DISC training that if you have high self-awareness, it can lead to healthy relationships. And healthy relationships, the number one indicator of happiness. A happy brain is a productive brain, right? That's kind of the formula that these soft skill things do matter. But we are focused very much today on the mindset, right? Our mindset that we bring into these things and kind of what we're focused on, what we're paying attention to when we wake up each day, right? How we're filtering these things to know what's actually helping us to move the needle forward on what we want to achieve and who we want to become. So go ahead and flip to page 2, and we'll walk through each of these competing concepts, right? Each of these ends of the spectrum, the extremes that we want to kind of analyze or pay attention to. And so we talked about the first one, right? So the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, versus if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. Well, another one, you've all heard slow and steady wins the race, right? But what if we compare that with the people who are like, oh, go all in. You see that mountain, you got to go take it. Don't hold back. Burn the ships. If you've ever heard that story and analogy from battle, right? Burn the ships, so you have to go for it. That'll be another one we'll assess here. And then the last one's a little bit of a different kind of mindset, a different approach. And there's a lot of people that talk about this concept of really, and this is a very relevant topic for what we've been going through as a society this past year. This concept of taking extreme ownership, which a lot of people, the way they would describe extreme ownership would mean really kind of controlling everything about your life, like taking that level of ownership to say, I'm going to control the outcome of these things. It's not happening to me. I'm going to go do it. Versus really kind of accepting what you can't control. Another way to think about that one is there's a difference between your circle of influence and circle of interest, and circle of control. There's things that matter to you, but you may not be able to control them. So kind of understanding the difference between those two. So what I'd like you to do is take a minute and go through this and first look at the first question of where are you now? Okay. And you can actually mark that. You can move the dial on the PDF to where you think you are now. And then again, think in terms of your future goals, right? What you're trying to accomplish, what you want to be known as, and think about where do you want to be, right? What's the ideal balance? Now, I will ask you, and Bob, I'll give you a shout out on this one because we've talked about this in the past. I will ask you not to choose the 50-50 mark, right? Don't put it right smack dab in the middle. It can be 51-49, but make sure you're thinking through, where do I lean on one of these two? And so if we start on the first one, you can go ahead and start working on it yourself, but I'll keep kind of talking to you a little bit. If we look at that first one, shared a little bit in the opener, but doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I believe, most, if not everybody on this call is probably familiar with the birds, right? Many of you have taken a DISC assessment, even if it's not been through velocity. We could even apply a lens like the bird styles and kind of take a stab at where different styles might lean on this spectrum, right? If we're looking at where are you now, right? What's your default tendency? So when stress is high, when you're not paying attention to it, when you're in a hurry, right? When you wake up in the morning, what's kind of your default? What's the mirror, going to be? And so which styles, which birds might lean more towards, the definition of insanity if they're not attentive to it? Which styles might lean more to that same sort of routine approach to things?
So Ben, in looking and actually sort of at all of them, looking at them, I'm having trouble picking a default because I'm looking at them situationally. So in this situation, what I want to do, this is how I am, and then so I'm having trouble doing that first thing in the morning. Where do I want to be, kind of thing.
Yeah, but
Any ideas to narrow it down?
That's healthy way to think about it, though, because it should be situational, right? But the odds are, if you were to think about several different situations, right? If you were to kind of scope out for yourself, what are those different situations? And then where do you fall based on those situations? You could probably take the average and it'll show you close to what your default might be, right? If more of them, you often lean towards one as opposed to the other. And again, there's nothing wrong with really anything that's on this list. It's just about recognizing what's the right fit for you, right? What's the individualized or customized approach to this for you, not just, naturally, but also with in alignment with what you're trying to achieve. And we often talk about the difference between safety and comfort, right? There's a difference between safety and comfort. We should be in safe environments. We should create psychologically safe environments for our teams. We should be in psychologically safe relationships, all those things. However, life's not always going to be comfortable, right? A lot of growth happens when we get uncomfortable, when we put ourselves in situations that force us to be uncomfortable and allow us to develop that skill, to practice that. I mean, the extreme of that would be like exposure therapy, things like that, right? When we put ourselves in those uncomfortable positions, we can grow. So a lot of this is about recognizing, even if it's not where I naturally fall, where should I be? What should the dial look like on that list? So for example, those of you that are familiar with the birds, doves and owls may struggle, or it might become a little more natural for them to stay on the left side of that first one, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, right? Because it's steady, it's predictable. That's the pattern, right? And they like patterns. Whereas eagles and parrots, D's and I's, may lean naturally more to, or may struggle a little bit more with the side of, bouncing from thing to thing, right? They might jump a little quicker, right? If it doesn't work, they got to move to something else. So this is a way for us to just think through, where do I actually need to fall on these things?
Ben, how does role fit into how you should answer that? What you do, what your job description is, so to speak, or your core competencies that you need for a specific function.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, just like the situational piece, right? I think ties into, again, being aware of our natural default tendency, but also then thinking about, what am I trying to achieve, right? Where am I trying to go? Because there's no doubt, I mean, more senior roles in some types of organizations, let's even talk about different industries, right? Some senior leaders in certain industries need to be very risk averse, right? It's their job to hold the feet to the ground. It's their job to build a plan and execute the plan. Others, I mean, your businesses might be built on innovation. They might thrive on trying something new, getting outside of the box, or getting outside of what's comfortable, and trying something different. And then at different levels of the organization, obviously that can be implemented very differently. Great point, Dave. So let's talk through it. Anyone have an example from the first one? Where did you fall on where are you now?
Ben, I don't mind sharing.
Sure.
And I had a little bit different take. So let me go to the screen so I may not look at you directly. So I checked on the first, doing the same thing over and over again, to the box just to the left of balanced. And how I interpreted this statement, doing the same thing over and again, expecting different result, I took it differently. So as much as I may say to myself, Mark, I need to be different here. I need to approach this different. I need to not do that same thing over again. And yet I find myself doing it. So I interpret it that way. And where I want to be is the one box to the right of balance. But my take on, and I hope this doesn't really I hope I didn't misconstrue this first one because I understand where you're getting at. But when I read here, at first you don't succeed, try again. I would insert try differently again. So it's not about doing the same thing over. Otherwise, try again is doing the same thing over again. But I want to try differently. That's where I want to be. I want to be, I still want to be who I am in many respects, but I need to move that needle more towards the right, not extreme right, but more to the right about just being intentionally different, not doing the same thing over and over again. I don't know if you understood what I said, but that's
Absolutely. No, that's great, Mark. Very reflective. I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing. So, but for this first one, definition of insanity versus if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. Anybody want to share where they fall naturally versus where you want to be? I'm not afraid to call on people by name, and if you've already shared, feel free to share again. That's perfectly acceptable.
I'll share. I am on the extreme right side, but I don't think I do the same thing all the time. Like so I'm like a strong eagle, strong dove, and all right. Well, actually, a strong eagle, strong dove, strong owl. So like I care about other people's feelings. I'm always looking at the data. And then I really want the results. So I'm like, I'm going to try again. I'm going to try again. I'm going to try again, but I'm going to tinker every time, which I'm not sure how that fits into this at all. Maybe that's not even what that is pointing at. And I don't actually know that I want to change that.
I love that. I was waiting for that example to come up there too, Aubrey. And it sounds very similar to what Mark was saying too, right? It's not that you're moving off of it and like giving up, but that we're looking at it saying critically, all right, is there a tweak we can make? Is there an adjustment? But I love that you also brought up that there's going to be a lot of times where the ideal balance is close to where you are now, right? Where what may feel natural now. And that may be because in this example, in these types of situations, your strengths are being put to use in the best way. But a lot of these are often going to be, because I know many of you on this call, it's often going to be because you've put in a lot of the work already, right? You've done a lot of introspection, reflection. You've thought through a lot of these things. You've worked with your coach or with, different development opportunities in the past to help, kind of arrive at that proper balance at this point. So I love the fact that you already feel very confident where you're at in that balance, Aubrey. That's great. Anybody else? Let's have one more for this one.
Ben, excuse me, I have a question here. Could another way of looking at balance is, let's say wherever I am at where I am now, if I want to be that same spot where I want to be, could that be a balance as well? I'm right or wrong. I'm happy where I'm at, and this is where I'm at now, and this is where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, but could that be a balance?
I think that's kind of what Aubrey's saying, is that she feels like her current position, her current spot on that spectrum is where she needs to be in order to achieve her goals and to perform at her highest level. Yeah. So that's a great place to be. It's what we're looking at is, if there's a gap, what do we need to do, or how do we need to keep it in mind to bring some intentionality to kind of bridging the gap? But for a lot of you, you might already have struck a really good balance for that. That's great. Anybody else want to share for this one? Which way do you naturally lean? All right, we talked about this one for a while. Let's go on to the next one. Slow and steady wins the race versus go all in and don't hold back. All right, are you naturally more of the, no, let's stick with it. Let's be consistent in our approach, or is it more of go all in? And a couple of examples on this one that might be helpful. Anyone's ever heard the story of the 20-mile march? Right, a 20-mile march to reach the North Pole. The concept, basically, just at a high level, was they had made the commitment that they were only going to march 20 miles each day, whether the weather was phenomenal, whether the weather was terrible, they were going to get 20 miles. If it was clear skies and it was smooth traveling and they still felt good after 20, didn't matter. They were going to stop, rest, recover, and then be ready for the 20 the next day. The weather was absolutely terrible and it was a grind to get there. They were still going to make sure they hit 20 miles. Versus the other one, go all in and don't hold back. I mentioned it earlier, but like the burn the ships type mentality of saying when they arrived on shore, they burnt the ships behind them, so they could not turn back. There was no plan B. It was go all in, right? And so if you think about these two concepts, are you naturally more of the type to say, no, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to go all in, knowing that that could potentially lead to flare out or burnout, right? Or exhaustion, or potentially leaving a trail of people behind you because you move so quickly? Or do you naturally lean more towards the side of saying, no, I'm going to, take an incremental approach to this. I'm going to dip my toe in. I'm going to work towards it. But knowing that it may take a little longer to get there, or you may be missing out because of that kind of slow and steady approach. Anyone want to share where you naturally fall on this?
Ben, this may come as a surprise, but I'm a little more comfortable on the right side of going in a little bit more rather than less. It's maybe a surprise for you.
Those of you that don't know, Bob is also an ultra marathoner. So I think he's got a little bit of that slow and steady wins the race mindset too. But yeah, I hear you. Knowing you personally, that's no surprise that you feel that way. What about for you, Bob? Where do you think that is the right balance for you? Is leaning more towards that side? I think you're on mute.
Thanks. It's a great question. I think for me, I realize that I'm out of balance or push hard on that side. So I have to do extra things to support the energy to survive and sustain that. So I don't always believe balance is back and forth. I have to add some extra things to support the extra pressure. So that's what I choose to do.
Yeah, love that. A great way to think about this too is, again, it's the overuse of a strength that can create weakness. And sometimes there is such thing as an addition by subtraction, right? So by removing some tendencies or some areas, it actually does bring you back maybe closer to center, or allows you to take a small step the other direction. There's no perfect balance on this. We're not telling everybody to be at 50-50. That would not be accurate. That would not be good, sound, sage advice for many of you based on what you're trying to accomplish. Many of you likely need to lean more towards one way or the other. Anybody else? Which way do you default to?
So for me, Ben, I definitely default on the right with going all in and don't hold back. And when I think of the left, actually one of the words that I put down for how I want others to see me is consistent. So I can be impatient too, and I just want to go. And if I'm not there when I want, I can get frustrated. So I definitely think that I need to shift more on the left side and remember that, slow and steady is okay too. And impatience isn't going to help anything.
Yeah, that's great, Lauren. Love that. Rick, were you going to mention something as well?
Yeah, I mean, of the spectrums, this one I'm most on one side, and it is the go all in. And one of when you had the what do you want to achieve this year, one of the things that become clear is I want this, not even this year, I want to run for the rest of my life. And as an aging runner, I've hit these moments of maybe not all in's good. Consistency, Lauren's word, I think, is a good thing. I'm learning in my running, consistency is more important than any given run. And then of course that goes to the bigger observation of how could I apply that to the rest of my life? That's concrete, right? But are there other things I should do that too? And so it was an interesting one to think about.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. Again, it goes back to that situational piece of it can apply differently in different areas. Right. But either way, it's important to reflect and say, well, where am I naturally going to lean if I'm not, paying attention to it? And we talk about this often in this setting. Right now, you signed up for a development series training, right? You signed up with something that you knew was going to challenge you intellectually. We're going to think through things. We're going to talk about it. We are all on our best behavior right now. But what happens when it's, 5 o'clock today and you're rushing to get to T-ball practice or to get home or to make it somewhere, and you've still got a long to-do list of things, or the next time you're really excited about an idea in a planning meeting and you're trying to take on the world, right? So those are the type of situations where we want to bring this with us to keep in mind, okay, what is my default? If I'm not hyper aware to it, what am I naturally going to lean to, just so I can be aware, to bring it into reality, to say, all right, let's pull that back, or let's push it forward. Let's move it one way or the other. That's great, Rick. Anybody else? How about for this one?
Ben, I'm sitting here thinking, I know what I believe to be true, but I'm curious what others would say. I was almost like a 360 on each of these sets of questions of what others would describe each of us as. Because I'm curious if it would align with our own self-perception.
Yeah, that's a great point. And obviously, like that's a major theme here, right? Is it's a test of our self-awareness. It's like we've been doing a lot of 360 assessments and things like that lately with leaders, and it's so much fun to see those kind of shine some light on a blind spot, right? Or see if how they assess themselves is actually how people around them see them, which is a really cool kind of process and journey to go through. So where do you think for yourself, Dave?
I think I lean to the right in most circumstances, but I feel like I'm a grinder as well. So but I'm not risk averse. So lean to the right, but probably one or two to the right of center.
Yeah, I think that's probably true for you too. I mean, if you're asking my opinion, I think for goals and objectives, you lean to the right, and relationships, you lean to the left, right? Relationships, you're very steady and loyal, and build them for the long haul.
Yeah, good. I agree.
So Ben, Aubrey asked a good question in the chat box. You may want to take a peek at it.
Thank you. Aubrey says we need to take in feedback and show up on these spectrums in a way that meets the moment and the person. But so often that feedback is contradictory. We'll be talking about that as part of this series, and how to apply discernment to know when, how to take in all that feedback. Yes, in a lot of ways, because again, it's about that balance between kind of self-awareness and situational awareness, right? What's my default, and then what's the moment call for? We use that phrase a lot: match the moment, not the mirror. Right? The mirror is who you are, that natural default tendency. The moment is who you're with or what you're doing, right? It's the moment at hand. And so we will be, especially in next month's session, because we're going to be talking a lot about the leadership application of some of these things, and some of these sort of competing theories that are commonly seen in leadership circles and topics. And so that'll come up a lot, because clearly those sort of dynamics are really challenging. All right, what about the last one? Taking extreme ownership. So kind of saying, I got this, grab the bull by the horns, go for it. I'm going to figure it out. This is up to me to resolve. But the overuse, right? That extreme could leave you with a lot of anxiety, right? Or a lot of unfulfilled desires, as opposed to accepting what you can't control. Maybe a little bit more of recognizing some contentment, right? Understanding, hey, there's certain things that really are outside of my control, and being okay with that. So where on this spectrum do you typically lean, and where do you think you should be based on what you're trying to accomplish this year and what you want to be seen as?
I'm on the left side for both of them. So I think I own more than I probably should think. This may not make sense, that I should think that I own, because there are some things I know I can't control them, but I'm not accepting that I can't control them. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give myself ownership of that anyway, because I think there should be a way that I can control it. So while I'm accepting it, I'm not accepting it for the fact that, this makes no sense, I know to you, but I'm not accepting it for the fact that I can't control it. I'm accepting that I don't know how to control it yet. So that's a little bit, different. So I put myself on the left, but I honestly, instead of going to accept what I can control, I want to go a little bit more towards taking more ownership. Because I think if I stay where I think I need to do that to grow and change. I think I need to take more ownership of the things in my life. to grow where I
Yeah.
want to go.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's about picking apart the things that are within your control, that you can own, that you can actually influence, and taking more ownership over those things while learning to recognize the things that are outside of your control. Is that a fair recap?
Pretty fair, but I have difficulty accepting that there are things that I can't influence or control at all. It seems like there should be, and I mean a big world picture things. The other, I can't. My single vote isn't going to decide who's president or something like that. Part I got, but I think the things that are closer to me, I think that there should be some things that I can do to impact whatever that is.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
I really don't like to be on that far right. Maybe I need to be, but
No,
yeah.
that's good. Thank you. Anyone else?
I think one example that we talked about prior to starting this webinar that helped put it into perspective for me was the pandemic. So I think I lean a lot more to the left side. And that was a hard pill to swallow during the pandemic. Was there was a lot I couldn't control. And it was still hard on myself, maybe with the quantity or quality of the work I was putting out. And that was a lesson I needed to learn was, give yourself some grace. We can't control everything. And, but take ownership for what you can.
Love that, Lauren. I think, Carlene, that's kind of like what we were just talking about on yesterday's coaching session, right? The fact that like the pandemic did throw a lot of people into that mindset of saying, wow, there's a lot that is outside of my control, especially if you have someone that, like many of you on this call, that are used to getting to the point of your career, of your success, where, you could take a lot of pride in that. You've done a lot of the right things to get to where you are. And then all of a sudden, whoa, there is a lot of things that are happening to us that are outside of our control. And we can either stay in a place of, and again, these are extremes, right? That's why we're talking about the balance, finding that fine line, where the extreme level of oh, I've got to figure it out, I've got to continue to climb and fight and scrap my way through this, can lead to burnout and anxiety and unfulfillment, versus the extreme of contentment could become complacency, or all the way to being like a victim mentality of it's happening to me, right? So finding that proper balance is so key. And it's been very challenging for a lot of people this year. Thank you for sharing, Lauren. Anybody else?
And I'll share that I'm a very big person on ownership. I think that we should take ownership in what we do. But the word extreme obviously threw me off. But I do take extreme ownership, maybe not the far left one, but the box just to the right of it. But what I found, instead of anxiety, it causes me to have less tolerance of people who may not take as much ownership as I do. And obviously different things, but one person who I call it acting more like a renter than an owner, that they are willing to let others do, things not working out is acceptable to them. It is what it is. Que sera, sera. That does not go well with me. But because I'm far to the left there, I find myself having less tolerance for them, where I think I should just chill out more so. And so I put myself not on the right side of the balance, but further to, let's see where I put myself, to the box just to the left of the balance. So I still want to take ownership, but I got to recognize that that has a negative effect on me when I go too far to the left.
Yeah. Yeah. And this isn't necessarily even about pinning one of these options versus the other. It is just about that sort of reflection and determining what's the best mindset for you to have, and how are these things going to affect your day to day. Thank you, Mark, for
Yeah,
sharing.
these are great questions, by the way. I really appreciate that, because it makes me really think about these things. So I really like these questions.
Good.
That I was just going to say, Mark, we had a coaching call with Ben yesterday, and that was a lot of what it was around, about accountability. And so kind of what you just said, it was a lot of what our call was around. And, a lot of us are owls, if you want to speak about the birds. And so I do fall more on the left. And to me, it's about accountability and exactly that. Less tall. I would almost use the word, sometimes you get a little bit resentful because people aren't as accountable as you. And I agree. It's when you said chill out, I think that's kind of, what we were discussing. It's sometimes you have to learn to let things go and maybe chill out a bit, because really it's only hurting you. So I think that's really good what you said.
Yeah, it's nice to know that I'm not alone in that.
Not at all.
Well, and
That's
what
great.
happens when you take extreme ownership all the time? There's a word for it. Eventually you
Burnout?
burn out. Eventually you burn out. And to Carlene's point, if you burn out, you're no good to anybody, right? So it's you that's being hurt through this process. And so I like this one a lot, because you can't just throw in the towel and just say like, oh, it's the universe doing this, right? I accept I can't control it. There is a balance of, I do have to still take ownership of something, but I have to also understand I can't always control the outcome. Just like in a conversation with someone, I'm a dove. And so if I ever had a hard conversation, or I knew I was going to have a hard conversation with someone, I would spend weeks playing a story in my head. Does anybody else do that? If I say this, they're going to say this, and then this is going to be the outcome. And oh, well, maybe we shouldn't talk about this, and I won't make sure that this topic comes up. And I learned a few years ago that that was a complete waste of energy and time. I was trying to take extreme ownership of a conversation that hadn't happened, right? And so giving up a little bit of that control, I started to realize, what if I just had the conversation? Let's just see what happens, right? I can't control how Mark's going to respond to something. That's on Mark. It's not on Brooke. That's on Mark. So it is a little bit of a balancing act, but you will burn out if you take on too much ownership of something consistently. So
And Brooke, there's another aspect I take on this one. Because the more ownership in a group setting, the more ownership I take, there's less room for others to take ownership on a particular topic. And so it's, the concept of slowing down in order to speed up. To pick Ben's notion seemed like a paradox, whatever. And I know that, for instance, I had a CEO client that the development objective for him is learning how not to lead in order to let others lead. So the more I step in and take ownership, the less people find the need to step in and take ownership, and I'm robbing them of that opportunity. So that's another reason why I need not to take extreme ownership, to let others own.
That's a great example, Mark. In a couple of our leadership courses, specifically our one on empowerment, we talk about that as the helicopter manager, or in some other areas, the heroic leader. And the concept that with that level of helicopter hovering, the goal is to protect, the goal is to own, the goal is to own the outcome and to be accountable. Yet you're absolutely right. We can kind of unintentionally, a consequence could be that other people have less level of ownership or of engagement into the process. That's great. There's one other thing I was going to mention too, along with the point that Brooke was just making as well. So Brooke, for you, it was over preparing for those type of conversations and overthinking it. But that's a great example of, again, the two extremes, right? Because for some people, they just dive into that and trust their natural charisma or their natural, ability to articulate their point of view, and, oh, I'll figure it out on the fly. And they need to spend more time preparing, right? So again, that's the extremes. It's about finding that balance. I love that example. Anybody else? I know we've got just a couple of minutes remaining. Well, good. Well, I do want to leave you with kind of the I guess the request that you take a few minutes and you go through the last couple of questions around what is one thing you can do in each of these areas to move you in the right direction. And for some of you, it may not even necessarily be like a practical thing, because it might be situational, but it might be assessing your triggers, right? Or what are the type of situations that cause you to go to your default tendency instead of where you want to be, right? That's a really helpful exercise to just think about, well, what are the types of situations that might cause me to take too much ownership and cause a lack of engagement from my team, or to burn myself out, or to wear out, right? What are the type of situations where I get really excited and I just go all in, when in reality, slow and steady may be a more effective approach, right? So take a few minutes and actually walk through that. And then, like I said, we are going to be continuing with this series over the next couple of months. So our next one is going to be on the topic of leadership. Give you a couple of examples. We're going to talk about sort of the areas where it feels mutually exclusive or contradictory in the moment of both humility and confidence, right? As a leader, you need to have confidence, but you also need to have humility. What does that look like? We're going to talk through that, as well as some others around how you make decisions, around intuition versus data, logic, reason. And so a lot of those are going to apply to the leadership balance and leadership dynamics next month as well. So hopefully you'll be able to join us. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know it's always a challenge to schedule an uninterrupted hour like this, but we appreciate you joining us. Hopefully it was valuable. If you do have any feedback or input, or as you're going through your day to day, if these sort of situations pop up and you start to think in terms of this sort of finding the right balance for you and for your goals, please feel free to share those stories with us. We'd love to hear about them as well. But thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ben.